self-determination and sovereignty. What we found in reaching out to tribes and in developing this is that in the area of unintentional injury prevention, that tribes have developed laws and policies related to seatbelt use, child passenger restraint, pedestrian safety, and distracted driving to prevent unintentional injuries. And so the database that is available on the Policy Research Center site, ncai.org/PRC, you can actually search through for terms like seatbelt use, public safety, pedestrian safety, to find which tribes have codes that they've given us permission to use and to feature as part of this database. In addition to that, and our focus in the first brief, we really wanted to showcase cases of how tribes are working to navigate the complex policy context in order to actually implement some of this work to ensure sustainable federal funding, infrastructure investment, intergovernmental cooperation, and education and outreach. So that's really the focus of this second brief that we released just at our October conference. The goals of this work around tribal public health law are threefold. At one level, we want to inform the work of other tribes and nations, so this nation-to-nation coordination and sharing is really important to NCAI. We want to also call policymakers to meaningful action on tribal transportation and highlight tribal challenges and successes going forward. A couple of the slides I'm just going to flip through here real quickly in terms of key trends. First of all, American Indians and Alaska Natives are the most likely to die from unintentional injuries. This is often the second or third leading cause of death, depending on which report you're looking at. And within the context of unintentional injuries, we find that the primary cause of injury-related death is really related to motor vehicle collisions. And the rate at which Native people experience these collisions and death is 2 times that of all other groups. But the big takeaway is that these are preventable, and that's what we want to focus around here. Second point on the next slide is that looking at preventing motor vehicle collisions is the trends in seatbelt use rates. So this is from NHTSA, and it's looking at overall seatbelt use on tribal lands. And what we found is that it's increased to 68.5%, so we've seen some growth since 2004, where the rate was about 55.4%, where the national rate has stayed pretty consistent at 80%. And further in the first brief that we have a link to at the end of the presentation, you'll see that we focus in the brief around child restraint systems, which can reduce the risk of death by 70% for infants and by 54% for children aged 1 to 4 years. So where there's data available, we know that seatbelt use is really critical, and trying to get the education out there about how tribes have established seatbelt policies and programs to help educate and outreach. We go a little deeper in the next slide to look at one of our groups that is particularly impacted by the need for more motor vehicle safety, and that's our young boys, Native boys and men. What we found in this slide is that Native boys and men are subject to higher rates of motor vehicle deaths. You see on the left the male rate compared to the female, and this is for AIAN. It's just at such a stark high level, and this is a little bit of older data, but we haven't seen much change in these trends. In the next slide, it's the same point, but we zero in a bit more on pedestrian death, and again you see very high rates. So some of the work here is to address Native people broadly, but there's a need to also look at what's going on with a demographic group like our Native boys and men and how to develop initiatives this way. So that gives you a sense of some of the data that's in these. We're hoping to tease you a little bit, to entice you to read the briefs a little bit more closely, but those are a few of the visuals. I'm going to go ahead and pass back to Sarah now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about moving from the first brief into the second brief and the required context we needed to highlight here.
Hello everyone, again my name is Sarah Patalski and I work with Malia here at the Policy Research Center. It's been really a really eye-opening and fascinating experience getting to work with the various partners that we've collaborated with in producing this secondary kind of follow-up brief. And what we really recognized, as Malia mentioned, is we needed to bring a broader context and talk about some of the various things at play that were influencing the success and some of the challenges that tribes were facing on the ground with respect to preventing unintentional injury and death when it came to road infrastructure and the implementation of various policies. What we see is that tribal leaders are working to use tribal law and policy to prevent unintentional injury and death, but the challenges primarily address complex land ownership patterns, multi-jurisdictional regimes, unmet infrastructure needs made worse by the current flow of funding allocations away from roads to law enforcement and other non-tribal jurisdictions. So here in the first bullet point, we're kind of addressing this issue of divided lands and many hands of government, these problematic areas around jurisdiction. And this looks different in the contiguous United States as it looks different in Alaska. So there are many, we dig a little bit deeper into the history there. But what broadly we can state is that tribal governments have been struggling to exercise sovereign decision-making authority over land planning, where we are faced with policies that have implemented checkerboarded reservations, lands are fractionated with the various generations inheriting lands, borders have been diminished and or may extend across multiple states. There's a variety of various contexts in which a tribe might be faced with respect to jurisdiction and land base, and the challenges as far as the other governments that they might have to work alongside in safety planning. Jurisdiction clearly has a bearing on the maintenance of road infrastructure and the funding that is available to tribes. As we see here in this figure, funding for the past decade from the BIA road maintenance program has fluctuated between 2.1 and 24.1 and $27.3 million, and declines in recent years despite inflation and rising costs of road construction. So these inadequate levels of federal funding was a barrier that was cited across our conversations with the tribal transportation leaders, with the exception of those that had managed to secure large-scale competitive grants. It was very much noted that for smaller tribes, it's especially difficult to engage in sustainable safety planning, as it's often required of them to plan and set aside savings for many years just to construct as little as 10 miles of road. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to this next slide. These were some of the key elements that we saw as really advancing tribal communities' safety more broadly. In every conversation that we had with our 5 case study partners, who we will reference in the following slide, there was mention of intergovernmental cooperation, working with the counties, local governments, as well as state governments, and thereby being able to access new pools of funding and kind of do some cross-educational efforts in a sense, looking at ways in which they can communicate more about their tribe and their goals to these potentially non-tribal actors and agents, and thereby kind of build a common will and common understanding of what is needed to enhance the safety of the communities beyond the boundaries of the reservation of or the village. That kind of ties in nicely with funding for infrastructure. There were, of course, references to federal funding programs, which were very important, but this is a crucial element, baseline. And then, of course, there is also road safety codes, which has kind of been the angle which Malia and I have been approaching this whole topic, is looking at what is in existence, what tribes have taken action to start enforcing laws of their own and with respect to child safety restraints or driving under the influence laws, whatever seems to be the predominant issue that the tribe is dealing with. Have there been steps to enforce codes and penalties and try to then have greater compliance with those codes through this final point, which is public outreach and education. It really feels that you can implement a code, but if people don't know about it, people are completely unaware and don't really see the value of it, then there are potential barriers to implementation there. We'll go ahead and switch to this last slide. This is where we wanted to really highlight some of our key partners here. As you can see, we have the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, who is one of our featured case studies, the Colorado River Indian tribes, Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes of the Wind River Indian Reservation, Seneca Nation of Indians, and also the Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium, which is a Native organization but represents a variety of villages positioned in the southeastern part of Alaska. By highlighting the efforts of these 5 tribes and tribal organizations, we wanted to draw attention to these opportunities and complexities in establishing, implementing, and enforcing public health law. The 5 case vignettes presented here, we really wanted to look at both large and small populations, ones that had checkerboarded or contiguous land, unique jurisdictional authorities, and broadly a range of geographic characteristics. So we wanted to really highlight a diversity of stories in this new brief. So we're going to go ahead at this point, and I would love to introduce Robert Endicott, who is going to, as a representative of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, he will be sharing some of his story and highlighting some of what he shared within this brief. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce him, make sure that he can speak. Robert, can you hear us here? And
yes, thank you very much. Again, I'm Rob Endicott. I serve as the transportation planner for the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. It is a very large tribe. We serve 14 counties in northeastern Oklahoma. We have well over 100,000 members living in that area. It's also a very large employer. We have right now over 8,000 employees with multiple departments. The land is checkerboarded with tribal trust and restricted lands along with fee lands, and so we have to interact with the state and local governments whenever we do anything, and highway safety is included. Earlier this year, we started the planning process to develop a highway safety plan with the goal of preventing accidents and saving lives. The format that we're using to develop this plan is based on the Federal Highway Administration's 4 E's, which are engineering, education, enforcement, and engineering services. And some of the things that we have been able to identify so far is that from the engineering perspective, our road improvement programs, specifically through the tribal transportation funding source, helps the road situation out there, because whenever we go to improve a road, all of the safety features are all included in our improved roads, but we acknowledge that with that program it is limited, and that we can't improve every road out there, but the ones that we do, they have the maximum safety features included on those projects. Some of the other things that we've been looking at from an engineering perspective is looking at the accident data from the state's database, and when we get that data all assembled, we'll be able to look at problematic areas and be able to address those areas specifically with road improvements, and even at a later date probably include them in our current prioritization process, which includes some safety features like sharp curves and things of that nature. When we look at our projects, if projects have dangerous curves or steep grades or limited sight distances and things of that nature, they get a higher rating and are generally selected for construction prior to other projects. One specific note from the engineering perspective is that we have been able to apply for funding from the Tribal Transportation Safety Program. We have an intersection next to the tribal complex that has been very dangerous for a number of years now. It was unsignalized and on a 5-lane divided highway, and we've had numerous accidents there and hundreds of near misses. We were able to work with the Oklahoma Department of Transportation on that project and to finally get some approval to install signal lights and striping so that that the traffic can flow through that intersection at a much safer rate. And I believe the project is nearing completion as we speak. And so we will be improving the traffic situation at that intersection. We've also been looking at safety planning from an education standpoint, and that one of the things that we've noticed in looking at the state data is that most accidents are a result of driver error, whether that be inattentiveness, impaired driving, texting while driving, or whatnot. And that one of our goals is to from an education standpoint, to look at that data and see how we can make an impact on reducing accidents from an education standpoint, whether that be signing or things of that nature. One specific note that I want to make on education is that most of the state education programs on driving and accidents tend to be focused on the urban areas, and so you don't see a lot of rural area driver education like signing and things of that nature. And so that's one of the specific areas that we're going to address. From an enforcement perspective, again, we have to work with numerous law enforcement agencies throughout the Cherokee Nation. Right now, the Cherokee Nation's Marshal Service is cross-deputized with 12 of our 14 counties and over 50 municipalities within the Cherokee Nation. But what we don't know at this particular juncture is how effective is our Marshal Service with the other agencies in terms of reporting and enforcement of highway traffic. And that'll be one of the specific areas that we're going to look into to see where we can make some improvements. From an emergency services standpoint, the Cherokee Nation also has an emergency service, ambulatory type vehicle service where we participate with other localities in responding to accidents and things of that nature. That's another area where we need to really take a look at how effective we are in responding to those accidents, and hopefully make some improvements in those areas too to maybe save lives. That's all I have at this particular juncture. I know that the planning process is probably going to take a while longer because of the immense amount of data that we've got to look through and the other agencies that we have to coordinate with. But we will be continuing on and hopefully have a highway safety plan with some specific recommendations in the near future. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you so much, Robert, and really thank you for setting the tone and kind of bringing a more concrete example of what these multi-jurisdictional issues can look like, how the Cherokee Nation has addressed them, talking about utilizing data to inform your efforts, and speaking to the various codes that have been implemented and the considerations that are at play as far as outreach and education and implementing new road signage, which I think our next presenter, who is Jody Clark from the Seneca Nation of Indians, will be able to speak to a little bit, as she has shared some exciting developments that they've been undertaking there on the ground. And Jody, would you like to introduce yourself? I'm going to unmute you right now, and I'll go ahead and flip to your next slide, which will have some of the photos that we have included in the brief.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, I guess, on the West Coast still. But thanks for the opportunity to just really kind of review a few things that we had a discussion about for this report. We are located in Western New York. Tribal population is around 8,000 enrolled members. Split, we have 5 territories here that are among 5 counties in the Western New York area. 2 of the territories, Cattaraugus and Allegheny, house a majority of our population, the residents, and where we have tribal operations. The other territories are primarily used for either enterprises or gaming operations. We are one of the largest employers in Western New York. Between the gaming and the tribal organization, we employ somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 people. So it has a big impact on the whole region. The 2 main territories, and I should go back, we have strictly treaty lands here, restricted fee. These lands have always belonged to us and retained by us through our treaties. So we have some very unique relationships with New York State, and they're not always good relationships. The Allegheny and Cattaraugus territories lie in some areas of major transportation corridors for the entire region, and we've had to really kind of face the problems of getting a lot of traffic through the area that wasn't necessarily wanted. So through the years, it's been really tricky in trying to work with the state on how that's taken care of. And through some unique agreements, we do obligate the state to maintain certain highways, but yet they still don't own them. Even designated state highways on our territory, they have the total responsibility for operating them, but the roads are still owned by the tribe. So the changes present some unique obstacles with jurisdiction. We do not have our own police department. We have tribal marshals and can only handle civil actions here. Any other actions, our marshals will call in the local sheriff or state police, and that's a very rare occasion. So enforcement is a challenge here as well, especially on highway concerns. So what we do, though, is on any of these state highways, and you'll see on the side, the upper corner, that is a roundabout that we have now in use. It started about 9 years ago when the Seneca Nation recognized this intersection. It was a 5-point intersection, basically, a real strange triangle configuration, all within about 100 feet. And there was a lot of accidents there. It was one of the highest accident rates in the state. Yet we weren't really getting much action from New York State on making any real improvements to it. So the tribe commissioned for a consultant to do a study, and as you can imagine, about 9 years ago, for them to come up with a roundabout as one of the prime ways to fix this was kind of shocking to everybody, and it took a little bit of time to educate the administration and the council that really might be the way to go, especially when there really weren't any of them in the area. So we did a lot of homework and research on that and did a lot of community outreach to teach people about roundabouts, how they did make things safer, how the number of accidents wouldn't only be reduced, but the types of accidents and the injuries and those that they would be just totally minimized. And you know, we met a lot of people that did not want to have this happen. But in the end, the council really believed in it. We just had a lot of good data that showed it, how useful they were. We've had this in operation for about a year now, and have had maybe a handful, just maybe half a dozen fender benders. No real injuries. Everybody drove away from these, which in the past we had deaths and severe accidents and loss of limbs, and it just this has been just amazing. Of course, there's still people in the community that say they don't like it, but now they don't know why they don't like it because it works, and they see that it really has been beneficial. Some of the other things that we've been doing, and much like most of the tribes around the country, we've all been looking closely at developing tribal transportation safety plans. And in fact, we don't have ours yet complete, but as soon as we started looking at it, we got involved with a number of activities. And even though our relationship with New York State isn't necessarily a good one at times, at the working level, we do get along quite well. And we've been invited to participate in a lot of things through the state that would be open to any tribe in any state, because a lot of it's funded through federal highway. But we did participate several years now in New York's Transportation Safety Summit. And you see on the bottom there, you see an auditorium full of students. What happened is we attended that safety summit, and the keynote speaker at lunch was this woman that did this 45-minute presentation that just threw you over with with data, but a real story on how a distracted driver just changed her life in a flash. And myself and our emergency management director sat there just kind of in awe, thinking, wow, this really changed the way I personally thought about even being on the phone, much less texting while I was driving. And it doesn't matter if it's Bluetooth even. And we just kind of sat there in awe, only to hear that the state, through the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee, had contracted with her to make this presentation at 75 high schools throughout the state. Well, we came back to the office like two days later and immediately started making the contacts. And next, we had to get the principals of the schools on board and that, but the next thing you knew, within a week, we had the 4 area high schools where our students attend all set up to have her come and present us. And that part of it didn't cost us anything. Just simply a little bit of time and coordination and working with the schools and working with the promoter for that woman. And her campaign is called Hang Up and Drive. So we brought that here, and while we did it, we held 2 sessions open to our communities as well. And we did have to, kind of provide her way for that. It cost us like $5,000, but when I took it to the administration for that, they said, that's less than 1 accident claim that maybe one of your drivers in the tribal fleet. Any accident claim, that's less than 1 claim and what they would pay out. So they gladly brought that in, and it was so well received throughout the region that we really hope to bring that back every few years and keep hitting that high school range at about 1,700 students, and then just kind of keep reinforcing it. And I'm sure she'll be changing her presentation a little bit too. We also have, other things that we do out in the community. You see that we get the drugs and alcohol impair everyone's safety. We've got signs like that throughout, just kind of scattered in areas where we know that there maybe is a higher risk. In the meantime, we keep developing our safety plan, hoping to, get some of these things down. I'm a little bit leery about having priorities listed. I like to kind of leave things open in the different areas so that when opportunities and funds come up that highlight one thing or another, that we're not going to miss out on those chances too. We will absolutely list priorities, but I would hate to have something like having distracted driving as like only a 3rd priority under education, and have another opportunity to utilize somebody else's resources to bring someone in for another talk like that. So there's a lot of ways to bring things in and to get information out to the community other than just your own resources. Don't be afraid to look for information from the local technical assistance programs through the state and other resources, like I said, with the Governor's Traffic Safety, and I'm sure every state has some sort of organization that handles those types of programs. We do continually promote trying to include all safety aspects in every new project we build. We've done a number of new bridges and other items where even in areas that don't seem like there's a need for a walkway there anytime in the next few years, we do anticipate that eventually all of our communities will be walkable. And so, you know, especially with bridges, the lifespan of 75 years, you have to consider putting sidewalks on them now, even if you don't have anything that lead off of it just yet. So that goes in on all of our projects. And we do have actually a pretty good trail system that we're developing either alongside the roadways or in other areas. And in fact, recently did get a state transportation enhancement program grant for $500,000 for about 3 miles of trail. So there are a lot of resources besides just the tribal safety funds, so don't be afraid to go after those. It's been a pleasure to just kind of show you a little bit of what we've done, and that is just a little bit. If anyone would like to come out here, contact me and take you around. But thank you.
You taking us through the multifaceted efforts there, and you really emphasized, both you and Robert, some of the insights that we've gleaned from all of the tribal cases within this latest brief. And just quickly, before we turn it over to our final set of slides from our legislative associate Gwen Salt here, who's going to talk about legislative priorities, we just want to highlight those 4 recommendations that we gleaned from Seneca, Cherokee, and the other cases. The 4 that we really pulled out that we saw were consistent was the first being to create a tribal self-governance program under the U.S. Department of Transportation. I appreciated your point, certainly, Jody, that you don't just have to look at some of the safety resources, but kind of look broadly. And I think this recommendation kind of echoes some of that in terms of a broader approach, making sure that tribal nations can be better equipped. Things like the TTAP, the Tribal Technical Assistance Program, and the LTAC, the Local Technical Assistance Coordinators, are really critical to providing that baseline support and training. But we really heard from you all and others that there's a real need to designate a self-governance program to further that exercise of self-determination. One of the examples that came up was around tribes having the option of assuming National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, approval authority as part of this. So this is definitely a part of the model that we're looking at, 477 kind of structure. How can we look at that across different issue areas here at NCAI? How can we support some of that? The second that we really heard was definitely around increasing federal investments, really making this a priority in tribal transportation programs to address those chronic unmet needs. We have some specifics in the brief. We're preparing here for our budget document process in terms of the request to Congress that goes from the President, and thinking about what Indian country's ask is. And some of the numbers that we've been looking at here are increasing the tribal transportation programs to $800 million for fiscal year 2015, with annual step increases of $50 million to $1.05 billion in fiscal year 2020. So definitely taking the long look because of some of the infrastructure needs that both Robert and Jody mentioned. Really making sure that funding accessibility is allowable and available by easing the transfer of federal aid funds, improving the speed and efficiency in getting IRFO funding to tribes, ensuring tribal eligibility for all USDOT discretionary and competitive grants. So trying to be very specific in this ask here and looking at various ways, and this came out certainly in the Cherokee Nation case vignette that's included in the brief, but in several others. The third item you heard today on the call, certainly one that's close to our hearts here in the Policy Research Center, using data to ensure tribal roads and infrastructure are maintained and safe. It was great to hear Robert talk about Cherokee Nation's efforts, given the huge access to state data. How can we learn from that to improve some of our planning in terms of collecting and monitoring data to inform decision making? We heard a lot about this in the Wind River Reservation and Colorado River Indian Tribes case as well. And there was some conversation across the cases about adequately funding the MAP 21 requirement that tribal bridges must now be inspected and included in the National Bridge Inventory. So it's about including tribal data in national data sets as well so that we can leverage the advocacy efforts through data. And then finally, one of the pieces we heard across all the cases was the need to continue to engage youth and train up the next generation to be transportation planners. So much of the outreach and education was really about engaging youth, new drivers, people who are going to be new on the roads, to really ensure that their training is right on to prevent these unintentional injuries and death, but also to excite them about transportation planning and get them motivated about social media campaigns and other ways of peer-to-peer education as well. So those were a few that we heard. Definitely encourage you to take a look at the brief. From that, though, now we pass over to our amazing legislative team here to say, okay, this is what we're hearing from tribes at the forefront of this work. How can we begin to think about what this means in terms of NCAI's legislative work? So I'll turn it over to Gwen Salt, NCAI Legislative Associate.
Hi, everyone. Again, this is Gwen Salt. I cover transportation for NCAI. We're a different shop from the Policy Research Center. They're more of academia, think policy, think tank. We're kind of more of the advocacy policy driven that takes place here in Washington. So I'm just going to kind of go over, as Robert and Jody have talked about, a lot of the initiatives that their tribal nations have undertaken to address safety issues. There's also the larger issue that, people who are involved with transportation policy is aware of this big, huge transportation authorization. And so I'm going to kind of go over what we could expect next year. As you know, at the end of this year, the 113th Congress, the second section, will come to a close. And last week, or 2 weeks ago, was last week was the election, midterm election. So there have been a lot of changes, and so I'm just going to kind of quickly talk about what could possibly come up next year. So, when I'm talking about, as you know, in the Senate, there are a lot of changes that are taking place. As you're aware, the Republicans have taken control of the Senate, and as a result of that, there's going to be some changes in leadership with the committees that oversee the transportation bill. And if some of you have heard my presentations and at other transportation conferences, I've kind of talked to you about the specific committees that have jurisdiction over the transportation bill. So I'm going to kind of go through each of the folks that could possibly, we won't know until Congress comes back in January who will step up to take the gavel, but these are names that by seniority who may take over the committees. So that would be Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma will be taking the chair of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, which is known as EPW. Senator John Thune from South Dakota will be taking over the chairmanship for the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and they kind of oversee mostly the administration of DOT, certain aspects of some U.S. Coast Guard, and some other transportation programs. Senator Richard Shelby from Alabama will be the chair for the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, and so they oversee all the transit programs, have jurisdiction over transit programs. The fourth one is Orrin Hatch from Utah, who will be chairing the Senate Finance Committee, and they oversee the most important issue of the Highway Trust Fund, which is the gasoline tax that that finances the transportation bill. And on the House side, the House side is to kind of take a look at that. As you know, Republicans still stay as the majority; they still take the leadership. So, Congressman Schuster from Pennsylvania will be continuing the chairmanship of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Currently, right now, Nick Rahal from West Virginia was the ranking member, but for those who don't know, he had lost the election, and so the next person in line to take the ranking member position is Peter DeFazio from Oregon, whose names have been tossed that he may take the ranking member But again, all that depends on next year when the new Congress comes in and figure out who will be chairing which and which ranking member will be assigned to which committee. But with regards to the House Transportation Infrastructure, because of the election, there's Republicans have gained more seats on the committee, so there will be fewer Democrats who will be holding seats on that committee. So again, a lot of things are right now uncertain until Congress comes back in January. Right now, they're currently in lame duck session. So I'm going to kind of just go over a comprehensive summary about what's going on. So right now, as you know, one of the biggest issues, the transportation authorization has been extended through next year in May. One of the biggest challenges still remains, and we don't know how this will play out, is how to pay for it. As you know, the Highway Trust Fund has not been increased, and there was discussion earlier this year about increasing. There have been other organizations who have been advocating for increase, which they feel that this is an easier way of generating revenue. Not a lot of Republicans were open to that. It was pretty much a political issue that nobody wanted to undertake. So we really don't know what is going to be a definitive direction that now that both the Republicans control both the House and Senate, we really don't know exactly what they're going to do. There's been discussions of a possible tax reform. In that, I don't know exactly what the possible tax reform is, but that's the discussion that they're starting to have. Also, the expansion of oil and gas drilling, revenues from that. There's been also the discussion of closing certain tax loopholes from airport tax and so forth. So there's right now a very preliminary discussion going on right now about what to do. And again, we won't really know for sure until Congress comes back into session in January. So there's a lot of great unknowns. There's also been discussion that nothing may happen. They may do another extension, but we really don't know. So that's kind of a sit back and wait to see what's going to happen in January, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more questions and answers about what direction both the House and Senate are going to take with regards to the transportation authorization. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gwen. We really appreciate it. It's always great to link across our different departments here at NCAI to try to get the best resources out to support this work. So we've got a few more minutes, and we can stay on a little bit longer. We realize we started a little bit behind, so we apologize. But if you would like to raise a question, just raise your hand using the webinar feature, and we will unmute your line that way. So do we have any questions? Has anybody raised any before this time?
All right, we see Vanessa Dodge has a question. We've unmuted your line. Vanessa?
Oh, sorry, I did not have a question.
Oh, okay. the hand-raising option. Okay. We'll wait to see if, oh, here's one. Rick Galloway. All right, your line is now unmuted.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was not only well done, but it was definitely in the vein of useful information that could be presented at just about any tribal general council or general assembly. What I'm wondering is the data that have been mentioned in here, like Rob Endicott's and Jody's and probably some others, and you've talked about the Wyoming tribes. And I'm wondering, will that data be coming out in some sort of a report that will be accessible to the, well, to everyone?
Absolutely. Our last slide here, if we want to flip really quickly, we have links to both policy briefs. So the first one, which has some of the more the pedestrian data and trends that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar, is the one that was released summer 2013. So that's available on our site. And then the one that has more of the case specific from Rob and Jody and the other tribal cases is the fall 2014. So both of those are available on our website.
Excellent. And one more question is about strategies to help tribal governments and the transportation departments in particular work more proactively with local agencies. Is there any kind of dialogue that's going on, or any kind of useful information that could be disseminated?
So this is Malia, and what I would say is, again, the fall 2014 brief has some of the more specific information about some of the intergovernmental cooperatives and approaches that some of these tribes have taken, and we've also received permission from those that have submitted these cases for their contact information to be listed as part of the brief, and that's part of what we want to do is foster the tribe-to-tribe, pick up the phone, kind of connect with each other where you can, but also with some of our tribal public health law database. We are trying to look at this issue because I think both intergovernmental like MOUs and coordination across jurisdictions and enforcement, which you heard on the call today, have both consistently come up as really challenging situations and the need for more guidance. So we definitely want to do more. We don't have anything specifically planned just yet, but if you have some some questions or some ideas about what would be most helpful, I think we really want to hear that.
The one thing that I express a bit of concern about is the way that safety audits on particular, reviews of roadways or intersections are not treated with the same amount of importance by the different agencies. And I was wondering if there was any kind of tactful process that can be presented to give the government agencies that don't actually allow for much importance to be placed on a safety audit. They're more concerned about the engineering, which may or may not have anything to do with the data which isn't being collected. So I'm just wondering if there is anything that is in the works for that to allow a safety audit to become a more credible tool.
I think that's a great point. We're going to make a note of it, but I know that it came up certainly in what Jody presented. So if there's, Jody or Robert, if you would like to respond more specifically, because I heard you say, Jody, too, in the roundabout planning, it was really hard to get New York State to pay attention to this issue, even though it had consistently been a high accident area. So we're happy to unmute you, either of you, but thank you for that, and we've made a note of it for our legislative team here.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's always going to be a challenge, and I think it means that we have to constantly work with local governments and everybody around us. And what I find is that I'm starting to repeat some of that, some of the same stuff that we did about 5 years ago, just because there's staff turnover, whether it's on tribes or it's states or other local organizations, is we constantly have to educate people as to why we are where we are, what our priorities are, what some of the laws and customs are, and why we might have different priorities than they do. And I don't think you can actually stress that enough on why you can't necessarily just implement something that might be a state or a local initiative, because the tribe has a different concern. But if we all work together, it seems like in the end we definitely do benefit from it.
Thank you. That's all my questions. You guys gave wonderful performances here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. Really appreciate your questions there as well. We did have a question from the audience, and it's actually directed to Jody. And the question is, what is the volume of traffic and trail usage in the Seneca Nation? I don't know if you've collected some data on that, but if you could share some insight, Jody.
Well, trail usage, we do know that the entire region around us actually has quite a few trails, because we are primarily in a rural section western New York, and part of the territories along the shores of Lake Erie. We've got the other territory that's along the Pennsylvania border in the foothills of the Alleghenies, and we have a lot more trail usage than ever. I don't actually have good numbers on that, but I can tell you every time we have a project going, and I don't care where it's at, a bridge out, something like that, we see people walking through daily on any project in any route that we're doing. And sometimes even the crews that are working are amazed that, there was 8 people that walked through in just an afternoon and on a route that they didn't even think they could get through. But as far as the traffic counts, especially on that roundabout, that is a fairly commercial area of the Cattaraugus Territory. We had roughly 20,000 ADT there. There was 2 major routes. One's a U.S. highway at only about 6,000 cars a day. Another a New York State route at around 12, and then a tribal road through there at about 2,000. But it just created this massive intersection of chaos and long delays and people getting impatient. And it's one of the busier areas, although both territories have 4-lane expressways or freeways through them as well. And we know that one of them has probably 50,000 cars a day, and the other one is somewhere between 20 and 30. So we do get a lot of traffic through the area.
Great. Thank you so much, Jody. I don't know if there are any other questions at this time. We'll wait just a quick minute and see if anyone else has questions for our presenters. Again, we have been recording this webinar, and we will be making it available publicly. There will be a link that can be sent out and also will be available on our website. And we do encourage everyone, as Malia mentioned, to access these briefs and do take a note of the contact information if you haven't been able to ask a question of Robert or Jody today. We're just so grateful for their time, and we wish we could have some of our other case study partners on the line with us, but I hope that you'll be able to, we all hope you'll gain some insight from their contributions to the brief as well. Again, we have my contact information up here, Sarah Patalski, so please feel free to take note of my number and email and shoot me any questions or comments or resources that you might be in need of, so happy to be of help.
And we will send out a post-webinar email with this information as well, so you'll have the links embedded as well as the link to the PowerPoint itself. So that way, feel free to share. All of this is in the public domain. So we just want to thank you all for taking the time this afternoon, and please know we're here to support these issues and want to continue to hear from you all and support your important leadership out there. So thank you for your leadership in tribal transportation.
Okay, any closing comments from Robert or Jody?
Happy holidays.
Be safe out there.
All right. Great. Thanks, everyone. Take care. We're going to close down now.